Welcome to the Organisational Inclusionist. I'm your host, Grace Mosuro. In this podcast series, we'll be delving deep into the pressing issues surrounding equality, diversity, and inclusion in both the workplace and the broader world. My goal is to foster understanding, inspire change, and amplify the voices of those advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. Throughout this series, I'll be engaging in candid discussions with leaders, experts, activists, and changemakers from various fields. We'll explore the challenges, successes, and evolving landscapes of equality, diversity, and inclusion. From dismantling systematic biases to promoting equal opportunities for all, we'll touch on a broad range of topics. But we won't stop at discussing problems. We'll actively seek out solutions and actionable steps to drive positive change. Our aim is to inspire and empower you, our listeners, to take an active role in making the world a better place for everyone. This is the Organisational Inclusionist. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of the Organisational Inclusionist. My name is Grace Mosuro. I am your host, and today I'm joined by Lucy Auchincloss, Partnerships Director at Lifetime Training. And Lucy's focus in life outside of her work is making a difference for other people through sharing her lived experience and role modelling the right behaviours. Lucy, thank you so much for joining me today. Today's conversation is one that I have wanted to have for a while. So obviously we used to work together back in the day, but we were always like ships that passed in the night. We'd meet once a month at the monthly business meeting, and those days were heavy. We'd have like some niceties and like we'd catch up and kiki a little bit, but I never got to really get to know your stories. I think our stories are so powerful in creating who we are today, but also just being lucky enough to have you join me to share this journey with our listeners as well. I really appreciate the openness that you're going to exhibit today and sharing your story and thoughts on your journey as a transgender woman in the UK, but also in the world, because you weren't born here. I'm hoping to ask you some questions that I think some people may avoid, and as a result, they miss out on key learnings and opportunities that could really help us to move the needle even further in inclusion. But before we get stuck in, I'd love it if you could introduce our listeners to who you are, but also tell us about your journey and experience that led to you becoming Lucy.
Absolutely, Grace. And thank you so much for having me to join today. It's really great to see you after a while doing away from working together. I'm really happy to talk a little bit about me. So I wasn't born Lucy. I was born male. I was born a Nicholas. I had a ridiculously long, I had middle names coming out of my head. So my full name is Nicholas St. John Taylor Auchincloss. So I think I must have been a painful birth. But I was born in the former Rhodesia, which is obviously now known as Zimbabwe, and moved back to the UK with my family when I was quite young. Grew up as a boy, and loving all the sort of the boy activities. So I loved my sport. I played army a lot, but underlying, I always knew that I wanted to be female. So my earliest memory, and I know that it was around age 4 or 5, was playing with the girls who lived next door to me. And they were goodies. I was a baddie. They would capture me and they would put me in the girl machine. And I would come out as a girl, and therefore I could be a goodie and play with them. And I know it was about 4 or 5 because when I told my mum this story, she said, "There's no way you can remember that. You were too young. They moved out when you were 5. And I described their back garden. I described the outhouse, which was the girl machine, to the color of the roof, everything. And my mum was just like, wow. It's there. As I grew up, I remember having these feelings, not understanding them, not understanding at all, sort of repressing them. I remember probably a little bit older, about 8 or 9, sitting outside of my bedroom window, wishing that witches would come past on their brooms, take me away, cast a spell that no one had known I'd ever been a boy, and just put me back in my bed as a girl. And then puberty happened. And it was punch in the face. It was kick in the guts. I mean, it was everything you just couldn't do. And, you know, I remember, and showing my age here, looking at the Littlewoods catalogue and seeing a woman and thinking, that's what I'm supposed to look like. That's what and I don't. And so that was a real struggle through puberty. And I think, you know, again, from my generation, so I'm nearly 50. My generation, you know, there was no internet at that age. You know, there was no sort of, you know, you didn't see transgender people on TV. You didn't have a social discourse around being transgender. So I just didn't know where to turn. I didn't drop out of school, but, you know, I was a straight A student who became a very average student because I found drugs, alcohol, partying, you know, and I don't want to sort of say that was a wasted life, because I had a lot of fun with it at the same time. But it was about blocking who I am and creating this persona of this very alpha male, very confident alpha male. And I really did fake it till you make it to the nth degree. And I was very successful. I was successful in business. And, you know, one of my friends said, you know, if you'd put a lineup of 50 men in a room and said one of these people is transgender, she went, you would have been the last person I'd have picked. And then drugs did me a favor, actually, because one of the side effects of cocaine, which was my drug of choice, was that you talk. And I started sort of wanting to sort of go, I've got a secret. Would you like to my female friends, to my girlfriends? And I've been really lucky with friends in my life. And I started telling people, and they'd accept it. And at this point, it was all my female friends. They'd accept it. And then, you know, sometimes we'd actually get together and I would be Girl Nick, because I hadn't settled on the name Lucy at that point. And, you know, I tell more and more people, and it creates a momentum and a mass. And eventually I got to the point where I told my sister-in-law, who, you know, unquestionably told my brother, right? And, you know, it was obviously a not a subconscious, but not immediately conscious effort to tell him. Now, my brother's ex-British Special Forces. You know, he is a proper alpha male, and he was fantastic, really supportive. And I think at some point he told my parents, and they actually sat on it for a few years, because they were sort of, when you're ready, you'll talk to us, which was brilliant. But eventually they saw that I was so unhappy that my mum approached me. She asked me if I had any issues with my sexuality. I said, if you fancy men, no. She said, no, that's not what I mean. And I said, yes. And explained it. And reaction was amazing. You know, the only question she really had was, why didn't you tell us before? And I think part of that is, you know, when you tell your parents, there's no going back saying that it was a drunken, drugged up thing, and I didn't really mean it, and it was just a bit of fun, right? What you tell your parents is real. She said, can I tell your father? So she told my dad. I went downstairs. I was in a room, and he walked into it, and he literally didn't say a word. He just put his arms out, stretched his arms out, and we hugged, and for, I don't know, probably about 5-6 minutes, and cried into each other's arms. They've been amazing. They've supported me through. I then went and got married, and I thought love will conquer everything. And that didn't work. And I got to move to Australia. What we're looking at, probably about 15 years ago now, nearly 16 years ago. And my then wife said, look, I can't go to Australia with you. You need to go and be Lucy, because I'd chosen the name by them. I went over. I met a girl within 3 days. So the third person I met on day one, I met a girl who I fell for immediately. And about 3 months later, she called me to say, why have you got all your ex-wife's clothes in the apartment? I was like, right. So I drove home, said, look, I need to explain to you. I explained to her the story, and, you know, a few tears, but she turned around and said, I've always thought I fancied women. I said, this could work. And we've been married for 12 years now. So that lady is now my wife.
Amazing, Lucy. No, really amazing. I think hearing your story, obviously directly from you, is really powerful for anyone that's on their journey to, you know, telling their loved ones and to understanding kind of what their life could look like in coming out and, you know, sharing that with their loved ones and with the world, essentially. So thank you for that. That story gives me hope of my happy ending. It's like, oh my goodness, like how perfect is that? And I know the journey was bumpy, and it wasn't by any means easy, but just to know that actually life is what you make of it, and that there is a happy ending possible for you if you're different, or if you aren't what society views as the norm.
Yeah, and I think, Grace, on that, you know, to sort of increase the happy ending. So I had gender realignment surgery. So, you know, my male genitals removed, female genitals created. But before I did that, I froze my sperm. And we used that sperm as donor sperm with my wife. And we have a 9-year-old boy who is genetically both of ours.
Amazing.
So, you know, we have a real family, which is our family, and it is, you know, genetically our family, and what have you. And yeah, you know, very challenging circumstances, and circumstances that, you know, I wouldn't wish on anybody. But, you know, I think I've had an awful element of luck. I mean, I've been exceptionally lucky with the people in my life, and I think that's a really key thing to recognize as a privilege, is the quality of people that I have in my life. But some of it, you know, you take your chances, and you see what's out there, and, you know, if you put yourself out and be vulnerable, there will be people who reject you.
Yeah.
And actually, your life is better off without them.
So that you see,
your life is better. Your life is better off without them.
Thank you.
Regardless of who they are, right? You know, if they're not going to support you for being you, you know, and it's easy to say and it's less easy to do, but, you know, walk away.
Yeah.
And, you know, there will be people out there, you know, who would have known that the 19-year-old girl that I met when I moved to Australia would turn out to be supportive, to love me. You know, she started dating me as a man, but actually she realized that, you know, she loves women. You know, but if I hadn't put myself out there, I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah. That's amazing. Now, I started this podcast with just an explanation that I'm going to do my best to ask some of the questions that people probably burn to ask or understand but don't ask. And I do know that some of the questions I'm going to ask you are really tame. And then there are a couple that I've just thought of that I think actually anyone who's listening and doesn't understand what we're trying to do with this episode in terms of education might think that's a cheeky question. Lucy's given me permission. Okay.
Absolutely. Far away.
So you mentioned you've had gender reassignment surgery. What was that like? And kind of how has that changed your life experience? So it's a bit, you mentioned earlier about puberty starting, and that was like a punch to the gut. Like, for, you know, obviously doing a surgery like that is quite serious and quite intrusive. So how was that for you? How was recovery? How do you feel now? What is different for you?
So I had surgery on my 35th birthday. So it was a genuine rebirth.
Yeah.
The surgery is major. You know, I think it's probably one of the sort of more major surgeries that you could possibly have. It's agonizing pain for a long time afterwards. It has its challenges. So, you know, one of the things they do is they create a vagina, but effectively what your body does is it sees it as a wound. So it is forever trying to close it, and will for the rest of my life try to close it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have to use equipment and stuff to keep the wound open effectively.
Yeah.
So it's a lifelong effort to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I no longer produce any hormones naturally. So I have hormone treatment, I have hormone implants. And again, that's a lifetime effort.
Mm-hmm.
But, and this is the important but, my mum called me. So my dad flew out. So I had the operation. My dad flew out to be with me the entire time. You know, again, I talk about how lucky I am. My parents paid for it. It was private. It was with one of the leading surgeons in the world.
That gave me goosebumps, Lucy. That is amazing.
Absolutely fantastic. And a quick sort of, you know, reflection of the person my dad is. There was a lady there who'd had surgery who had no one. And she'd gone there on her own. And I found out from one of the nurses that my dad used to go up to her whenever I was unconscious and spend time with her. You know, which was, yeah, breathtaking, especially of my dad. But my mum called me when I sort of came around, when I was first complimented, and she was, "How do you feel?" And at this point, you know, I was packaged up. I was having a lucid moment in between the morphine. And I went, "I feel right." And it feels right.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel now. You know, I mean, I talk to people about gender dysphoria and, you know, feeling that you're in the wrong body. I don't feel that anymore. Right. I don't, you know, there's no part of that, you know, and yes, it would be great to have been a genetic female, or, you know, or a non-gender dysphoric man. Right? I mean, you know, I don't really care either way. Right. But I am so happy in who I am, and it's the body that I want. You know, I could lose a lot of weight. I could lose a few bags under my eyes. Right. But, you know, I am me. And I can't tell you what that difference means.
That's amazing. So another question that probably seems rude to anyone that doesn't get it, but right. So women are viewed as, across the world, well, in Africa, where you know, in some parts of Africa anyway, women are viewed as like the top of the hierarchy in terms of the family. Like the woman is the matriarch, she drives everything. But in the majority of the world, women are viewed as the lesser sex. Women have traditionally had to fight for their rights, fight to be heard, etc. And obviously there are a number of other challenges that come with being a woman in terms of vulnerabilities. For anyone thinking, you know, for some people, they're thinking, why on earth would anyone choose to be a woman? Right. And that word choose is what I want you to explain to us. Is what are your thoughts when you hear that view is that you've chosen to be a woman?
So I think the choice was be a woman or die. Right. Let's be quite honest. It was, you know, I had to choose whether I had a life that was true or a life that was unsustainable and which may well have ended up, you know, and I contemplated it many times. You know, it's the statistics for transgender suicide and attempted suicide are through the roof.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'd be here today if I hadn't chosen that option. You know, so it wasn't a choice. It was a life of pain, or it was a life of being me. And, you know, interestingly, people have asked me in the past, sort of, you know, how's being transgender impacted you at work? And actually, I find being female has probably had a bigger impact. You know, and it's obviously not unique, but it's a particularly amazing position to be in, to say, I know how I'm treated walking into a room as a man, the respect that you just instantly get. And I know how I'm treated when I walk into a room as a woman before I've opened my mouth, right? And, you know, you can tell I haven't changed my voice. So that's one of the giveaways that I'm transgender. But before I even open my mouth or before I even speak to somebody, you know, the way that certain people deal with me, you know, and sort of particularly in business, where I work is fantastic. And most jobs I've been in have been brilliant. But there is you're a woman, what do you have to add? And I'm like, well, exactly the same as I did last week when I wasn't a woman, right? It's, you know, a big difference.
And I think that's another thing. Like, what impact do you think having that lived experience, like you said, the contrast for being, you know, from being a man or kind of coming into this world as a man and now living your true self as a woman, what impact do you think that's had on your view of allyship within minority groups or underrepresented groups, having had both sides of that experience?
You know, if I think about my experience, the thing that underpins where I am today is the love and support of my friends. You know, none of whom can understand what I've been through. None of whom, you know, have a frame of reference to say, I get that. Most of whom, you know, and the nature of my relationships and friendships is, you know, one of my best friends said to me when he first found out, he was like, I've got one question, can I take the piss? And I went, yes, because our friendship would change if it hadn't, right? You know, actually that means our friendship stayed the same. And you can't underestimate the impact you can have on other people by being an ally, by being supportive, by wanting to understand. And a lot of bigotry comes from, there's two elements to bigotry, I think. Yeah. One element is ignorance, right? And that's the proper meaning of the word ignorance. I don't know, therefore I'm scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you can break down by things like this and by education and by conversations. And the more people who can have that conversation and say, well, I've got a friend who's trans, or I've, you know, got a friend who's experienced that and I support them and they're a great person. And, you know, there's actually, they've gone through something, but there's nothing different about them as a person. It's phenomenal. And then you have people who are bigoted because they are bad people, right? And that's learned behavior. And you know what, you're probably never gonna change them, but what you can do is create an environment around you where if you do come across them, you've got people who'll catch you. You know, you've got people who'll be there for you, and you know that makes such a difference.
Absolutely. So you mentioned when your mum first spoke to you about it and you disclosed to your mum, even though she already knew, and I don't know if you said, she said, do you fancy men, or if you said that to her?
No, so she said, you know, do you have an issue with your sexuality? And I said, if you mean, do I fancy men? The answer is no.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So for people that think, you know, you are a woman and you're married to a woman, that means you're a lesbian. Can you explain, like, what is the correct term? Is there a correct term? How do you identify in that way?
So, okay, so correct terms and identity. So I identify as a lesbian, right? It's really, really simple. And most people would say that, you know, trans women, particularly the ones who've gone through the operation, who, you know, are in love with women, are lesbians. Yeah. Now there are some lesbians who say if you weren't born with a womb and weren't born with a vagina, you're not a true woman. And therefore you can't be lesbian. You know, there's some activists around that. But a lot of people are generally accepting that, you know, my sexuality is that I'm attracted to somebody who is the same physical sex as me.
Yeah.
Which is lesbian. And I think, you know, if you look at everything in the world, that you have a scale, right? And, you know, so you have sort of, you know, exceptionally heterosexual and exceptionally homosexual. And then, you know, you can be anywhere on that scale in between. And it doesn't matter whether you're in your birth identity or your gender at birth, or, you know, whether you've transitioned, you know, you'll still be on that scale somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So they're intersectional rather than, you know, because I'm a woman, it must be because I want to be with a man.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lucy. How would you define gender identity, and how does it differ from assigned sex at birth?
So assigned sex at birth is what the doctor sees when you come out of the womb, right? And, you know, with all the wonderful medicine in the world, you know, at that point, you can only take what you see. Now that has issues because you have people who are intersex and you have people who are hermaphrodites. But generally, yeah, you either have a penis and testicles or you have a vagina, right? So they then say, well, you're a boy or a girl. Gender identity is about who you feel you are, right, and who your heart says you are, and what you think you should be seeing in the mirror. Yeah. Now, most people's gender identity aligns with their gender at birth, and and that's the way I would wish it on everybody, right? Because it's not an easy thing to go through, that dysphoria and that disconnect. But there are a number of people who either have a completely opposite view, like myself, right? So I was assigned a male gender. I very much think I'm a female gender, and I've taken surgical steps to align myself. And then back to this sliding scale, you have people in the middle who maybe non-binary. And I think what's quite interesting, just using that term, and again come back to this point of allyship. Somebody who's very supportive of me, but from an older generation, said to me, but I don't understand this non-binary stuff. And I said, me neither, right? Because I'm totally binary, right? I was born a 1 and I wanted to be a 0, right? Okay. But it doesn't matter. I don't understand what it's like to be a black woman, right? But it doesn't matter, because that's how you are, and that's how you feel. And, what harm does it do me to say live your life?
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's a real key thing from an ally perspective. It's like, actually like the human, like the person, irrespective of any of their differences or any of their similarities. It's have that relationship on a human to human level, and nothing more than that.
Definitely. There's so much that I don't understand, which, like I said at the start, is part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation. But again, I think not understanding something shouldn't be a reason to dislike someone.
Right.
I'm a Christian, and I describe myself as a naughty Christian, purely because I know sometimes I do stuff that God doesn't like, but he loves me anyway, right? But my view, I've got some Christian friends who are very strict on the Bible says this, and this is, that's it. And I bow out of those conversations, because the one part of the Bible that I'm very big on is, again, this shows how I'm on the cusp in terms of being like the Christian I want to be. And when I say the Christian I want to be, in terms of, I'd love to have memorized the Bible, I've not. Okay, but there's a part in the Bible that talks about judge not lest ye be judged, or something. And that's my biggest mantra. There are things that I do in my life that mean that I am not a perfect human being. I'm not a perfect mother, for example. I'm probably not a perfect woman, So how dare I judge anybody else just because I'm a Christian, and say, what that person is doing is wrong, or that person has this religion and that's wrong. And I think the only reason I'm sharing that is because, I'm not very vocal about my religion, because I know that the perception that comes sometimes with saying that you're a Christian, or because some people are raised in the church, but they don't necessarily say they're a Christian. I'm a Christian by choice rather than by force, right?
Yeah.
But I don't ever want anyone in my life or in my circle to feel that they can't be their authentic selves with me, because they're going to be judged, because my Bible tells me to judge them. And I think that we're at a point now where, as Christians and as people, we should be able to take people as they are, but also allow people to take us as we are, and just be respectful. I don't understand everything. I don't understand everything about myself either, if I'm honest. But I'm really big on learning and educating people, hence the reason I have this podcast, because I want to create safe spaces where we can share our life experiences and educate other people that want to be educated about what our lives are like. So thank you for that, Lucy. And I would love to meet your dad one day, even if it's like virtually, because he sounds amazing. Like he legit.
My parents Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I just couldn't have wished for better people. My dad's quite a zealous Christian, actually. He as a young man, he traveled Europe, preaching as a lay preacher. But it's interesting when you say about Christianity, because I'm Christian as well. But sort of my view on the Bible is there are 4 books that are written fairly contemporaneously about Jesus's life, and then there are lots of other books that are read that have a moral aligned with potentially the people of the time. Right. And there are some stories which sort of suggest that, well, this is why we keep the status quo. But the 4 books that count, the Gospels, the teachings of Jesus, they teach us straight away about loving each other and not judging people. And Jesus had women in his closest sort of relationships, right? And Jesus didn't see the difference between the Samaritan and the Jew, right? It was sorry, the cat's trying to joke, right? So the stories of Jesus himself are exactly what we're talking about, right? The rest of the books of the Bible, I'm sorry, and this is where I'm probably not a great Christian, I might, they've all had an agenda behind them. All right, there's really great stuff in there, but they all had an agenda behind them, whereas those stories were contemporaneous or very shortly after views of the teachings of somebody who made a big difference.
Amazing. I love your dad even more. But so what are some of the challenges or obstacles that you faced as a result of living your true identity, Lucy?
I think the first one is it's always difficult the first time I meet somebody, whether it's my voice, whether it's any preconceptions they may have. I remember when we joined, not the school my son is at now, but the school he was at before, I heard that one of the parents on the WhatsApp group had gone, well, there's a transgender person joining, right? And it's like, I'm just a person, right? It's and I've made some brilliant friends there, other people, and back to this point of like, you know what, you're not worth my life, right? You're not worth it. But there's always that kind of fear and apprehension of the first time I have an interaction with somebody that I don't know. And sometimes that fear is realized, and you can be misgendered, and particularly say, because I've not changed my voice and I made a conscious decision not to do that. But when I'm on the phone, everyone is sir, sir, sir. And I get it, right? Because I sound more like a man down the phone than I do a woman. But then sometimes people will say that to your face, and it's like, I'm wearing a dress and I'm blatantly not sir, right? And that's difficult, and that's painful, and that can hurt. And then it's just it's that permanent sort of stage to realizing who I really was. The flip side of that, and we did a thing at work the other day where we talked about, well, if you can have an alter ego, what would be the powers that your alter ego would bring into the workplace? Really, really great. And I said, well, actually, it's interesting because I had an alter ego for 32 years. And the difference is now that I got to pick the traits that I liked of that person, because, I was a good person. And I've got to say the things that, I did to mask who I was, then I don't need to do that anymore. So actually, I've been able to create my own alter ego. And be the person that I want to be and the person that I'm proud of.
Excellent. What are some common misconceptions you see about transgender people that you believe need to be addressed or corrected?
Common misconceptions. I think you pointed out the first one was that it's a choice, right? And it's not a choice. Nobody in their right mind would decide for this as a way of life, and a way of understanding. I think then you have a lot of sort of misconceptions. You have lots of misconceptions around, like safe spaces. Yeah. So, what's a safe space for a woman if someone who is self-identifying as a woman can go in there like a toilet, right? And go through from there. And there's a very strong discussion, very emotive discussion about, you know, how trans people can operate within safe spaces. And, you know, I mean, just the other day, they talked to the news about the changes to Scotland's legal policy, imprisonment policy for transgender prisoners who'd committed harm to women, for example, and that they would be kept in a male prison if they were originally born as a male. They would be in their assigned gender. So I think there's this misconception that transgender people are these strange, potentially predator individuals who want to warp your children's mindsets and who, you know, have a trans, you know, people say, oh, the trans agenda, right? They say the woke agenda, right? Transgender is, I just want to be left alone to be the person I want to be, right? That's the whole of the trans agenda, right? It's just let us be. But you know, it's quite prevalent in media at the moment. It's quite prevalent in social discourse at the moment. And I think it's, you know, really something that I hope to be able to communicate that actually, no, I'm just me, right? Yeah. And I just want to be me, and I don't pose a threat to anybody. And, you know, if I wanted to pose a threat, I'd have posed it 20 years ago when I was a man, right? I would have, you know, if I was that kind of person, I would have done it regardless of who I am. You know, a rapist is a rapist, not because they're black, not because they're white, not because they're male, not because they're female. They're a rapist because they're a bad person, right?
I was thinking that while you were speaking, I was thinking that, you know, trans agenda argument is ridiculous because there are good people and there are bad people. Yeah. And in the same sense, you know, a female in a female changing room who is a bad person could do harm to females in that changing room. So that's just,
you know, Myra Hindley, Rose West, right?
Exactly.
You know, they're bad people, right? They're not bad people because they're female.
Exactly.
And they wouldn't be worse people if they were transgender female. They were just bad people.
Exactly. Thank you for that, Lucy. JK. So she was in hot water a while ago for doing what she called advocating for women's rights. However, others felt she was attacking the transsexual community. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think when you have a position where you have great influence over people's thinking, you have to be very careful about what you say and how you say it. And, you know, I've seen where it started, which was about sort of saying people shouldn't self-identify and be able to go into the bathrooms because, you know, men could dress as women, say I'm like a woman, and then attack you, right? And I get that, right? But I'm telling you that could have happened 10 years ago, right? You know, I used to go into women's bathrooms when I was still physically 100% male, but dressed as a woman and presenting as a woman because I was out as Lucy. You know, and I didn't attack anybody because I'm not an attacker.
Yeah.
But what happens and what's, I think, really sad, and this is the state of the world right now, and to be quite honest, it's a bigger picture than just the sort of transgender community here, is our social discourse is so polarized that there's just no humanity in between it, or very, very little. So she started with that point. She then had transgender activists go, you should be killed, you should, you know, I hope you get hurt, you know, who said, and I understand why they felt that passionately, but it doesn't change people's minds. She doubles down, right? And she's doubled down, and she has, you know, immense influence, right? My son loves Harry Potter, right? You know, and while I said, given actually, I'd rather you didn't watch this because, you know, look, she's not going to make that much more money out of me watching it than she's already made. So, you know, my son loves it and he enjoys it. But the whole, when you're in a position of influence, you know, anything you can say can have an impact. And I think, you know, when you're talking about transgender people, it's, would I say the same thing about, but would I replace transgender with black? Would I replace transgender with gay? Because if I would, then I'm having a proper social discourse.
Yeah.
But if it's like, well, I wouldn't say that because everyone would call me a racist, or I wouldn't say that because everyone would call me homophobic, then you are probably transphobic.
That is so interesting to hear it said that way, because it just makes sense. So interesting. Thank you, Lucy. So what has your experience been with women, and how can we be better advocates to trans women?
Well, there's different ways of answering that question, because when you first said what's your experience with women, I was going to say plentiful, but that's a little bit of both. What's my experience? Look, without my female friends, I wouldn't have built the courage up to be so open to my family, my male friends, and to develop from there. So, you know, the women in my life have been fundamental in giving me the platform that I'm on, you know. And if I look at my wife, you know, she's been with me now for, as I say, we met in 2008, so nearly 16 years. We're married for 11, and she's been just amazing, right? And you know, we have our ups and downs like any marriage does, okay, but it's the typical ups and downs of a marriage. It's not because I'm trans, it's not because of anything. So my experience has been really positive, and I think it's, you know, that embracing, that saying, well, you're one of us.
Yeah.
Right? You are one of us, and you may not have been born one of us, but that's who you are, right? And that's had a huge impact on me.
Amazing. That is such good news. What changes or improvements would you like to see in the life experiences of transgender people in the future?
I think obviously there's the ideal state, which is that we just accept each other as we go about our day. But the world has a long, you know, it's come some way, right? But it still has a long way to go for people of any form of difference to what's seen as a societal norm. So I think, you know, it's that acceptance. I think it's education, you know, stops us hurting people.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think the big thing that I'd like to see difference is that wider education, so that people know not to hurt other people. I think the more you can do that, and the more you can give people the freedom to just be themselves, I think will have a huge impact on transgender people and the transgender community.
Amazing. Thank you, Lucy. And finally, what would your call to action be to anyone wondering how they can be better advocates for transgender rights and equality as a whole?
So I think open your ears and open your heart. You know, be prepared to listen, be prepared to learn. You know, I remember you sharing your story after the death of George Floyd. And, you know, that was a real life-changing moment for me to listen and hear from people what their life experience was like. And it made me, you know, understand more about your story. And your story is unique to you. And there are shared experiences, but you learn how to be a better person by listening.
Absolutely.
And then by opening your heart, you know, we're just people, right? And back to this point of, you know, don't judge others, you know, treat people how you would like to be treated. Yeah, just have that love for, hey, you know what, I'm glad you're happy. Right. And for me, I think that's the most important thing, is be happy and let other people be glad that you're happy.
Exactly. No, I love that. Thank you so much, Lucy. Really appreciate this conversation. I've learnt loads, and I know that this will probably open up or start some conversations that maybe need to be had, give people some confidence in having or sharing their experiences with their loved ones, and also educate people that just haven't taken the time to learn about just your experience or experiences like yours. So thank you so much. Really enjoyed
my
it.
pleasure. My pleasure.
I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad to have had you on. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Acquaintance Consulting. We'd love it if you could take a minute at the end of this podcast to follow, subscribe, whichever is easier or available for you on the platform that you're listening to us on. We're really keen to grow this channel and really impact equality, diversity, and inclusion across the world. And with your support, we can do just that.